Good afternoon. Um, Sometime back in January of this year, uh, one of the research students of chemistry department who was here in 1970s, she interviewed me in the studio in the Center for IC and SR. After that, I got interested in the activities of Heritage Center, and so I was invited for a meeting of the Heritage Center, the committee, somewhere in March of this year. And then I moved a sort of an item in that meeting that we should try to write a history of IIT Madras coinciding with the Diamond Jubilee in 2019. All the other IITs have already brought out the history corresponding to Silver Jubilee or Golden Jubilee of their institute. In that meeting, no decision was taken about the writing the history, but then it was felt that the oral history interview should be continued. Unfortunately, the very next day, the studio in which the interviews were being conducted was destroyed in a fire accident. Since that meeting, it was very few oral interviews have been held because of lack of finding a studio with proper time slots. Let me tell you that the evolution of an institution like IIT Madras is a continuous process. Hence, there is hardly any difference between heritage and archival history. To support one aspect, leaving the other is not possible. I feel the sufficient time and money should be allotted by the Heritage Center for collection of material of archival interest. In that connection, I am trying to do my best to help the the Heritage Center. IIT Madras started in 1959. Unfortunately, the faculty who were recruited or were appointed in the early years are no longer available. Some of them are no more and some of them are not able to come and visit the Heritage Center and appreciate the material that we have already collected and help us with any extra information about those days. During the Golden Jubilee time, the motto of the Golden Jubilee souvenir was, "We are standing on the shoulder of the giants," the giants being the faculty who were there in the initial years. And the foreword to the campus chimes, which was produced by the Heritage Center, it was written that this is a coffee table book. Hence, it was felt that we should try to bring out the information about the institute either in the form of a historical document or in the form of, say, photographic albums, something in that fashion. And it is also essential that we must try to collect some of the items from the laboratories which existed during the early years. Let me come back to my own connection with the IITs and IIT Madras. My introduction to IIT started with the institution at Kharagpur when just when I finished my MSc chemistry course. I was interested in joining some institution where I can get some financial help. So, IIT Kharagpur was running a MTech program in applied chemistry. So, when I expressed my interest about that, due to various reasons, my elders as well as my teachers suggested that you better go to Indian Institute of Science and do your PhD. So, I moved to Indian Institute of Science without any financial assistance and stayed there for a year, and after I got a fellowship from the CSIR, so my life became easy and I could concentrate on my research work. I was able to visit IIT Kharagpur again in 1960 almost 3 times due to some personal work and also official. One of the professors from IIT Kharagpur had participated in an international congress in my field, and I was interested in seeing the preprints of that conference. The name of the professor was S.K. Bhattacharya, and I was already in touch with one of the faculty members there, Dr. M.B.C. Shastri, who was earlier in Indian Institute of Science. He has done an enormous amount of work, and he was an assistant professor at IIT Kharagpur. When I met him to find out the possibilities of working as a senior research fellow after completing my doctorate, he suggested I should look for an advertisement from IIT Madras. Of course, I was familiar with IIT Madras right from 1959 because one of my colleagues from IISc joined here as a lecturer. That means you can say the pioneer group of faculty members. In 1960, another colleague also joined here. Now, as far as the pioneer batch of students are concerned, the chemistry course was taught by Dr. V. Srinivasan, my colleague, Dr. T. Gopichand of chemical engineering, and Dr. D. Venkateswarlu, again of chemical engineering. And the material that they taught was more or less what was being taught in engineering colleges in those days. And in 1960, one of my other colleagues, Dr. Aramadan, joined here, and there was already one more person recruited, one Dr. Rajappa. Now, that year they split their work. So, the inorganic chemistry was taught by Dr. Aramadan, Dr. Rajappa taught organic chemistry, and then Dr. V. Srinivasan taught physical chemistry. And originally in the first 2 batches, the lab classes were held in the AC College of Technology, but even in the beginning in 1959, the then special officer has given cash to my colleagues, Dr. ex-colleagues Dr. V. Srinivasan and Gopichand to procure the necessary glassware and chemicals to start the laboratory course. Of course, the laboratory program in those days was different from the laboratory program which exists now in chemistry for undergraduate students. Anyway, I joined, I was interviewed for the post of an associate lecturer in the CLRI campus in 1961, and I was asked to join this institute in October 1961 to start the physical chemistry laboratory for metallurgy students, or the pioneer batch. Hence, I could not complete my writing of doctoral thesis. I came and joined and reported to Dr. V. Srinivasan on 13th of October 1961, and I was given accommodation in the Kaveri hostel. There were 2 hostels at the time, the Krishna and Kaveri, and Kaveri hostel has the warden Dr. V. Venkateswarlu, and since he was connected with chemistry from the beginning, he found out a room for me and accommodated me. And immediately, a few weeks later, Dr. Venkateswarlu was asked to take over as the president of the Institute Jamkhana, which was started that year. And so, there was a vacancy for wardens of the Kaveri hostel. At the same time, one of the assistant wardens, Mr. Swamy, had to move out of the hostel due to personal reasons, and hence they made me an assistant warden and Dr. D. V. Reddy of applied mechanics as a warden of the Kaveri hostel. And I moved into the assistant warden's room, which was better equipped with an attached room and other facilities. So, I could do my thesis writing and all that quite fast, and in November 1961, the head of the department, M.B.C. Shastri, joined as a professor. Around the same time, the metallurgy department was led by, was occupied by Dr. E. G. Ramchandran. He was appointed as the only senior professor in IIT Madras. Already when I joined, Professor R. G. Narayanamurthy, Professor P. Venkat Rao, Professor Sampath, and quite a few assistant professors were present. And since we were all residing or working in the same building, the building sciences block, we almost knew each other. And then we were occupying the eastern side, eastern wing of the BSB. It was in 2 floors. The ground floor was occupied by physics department and some other departments for their staff rooms, and there was also a big lecture hall there which could accommodate about 120 to 140 students in this. And in the first floor, one side, that means the southern side, was given to chemistry department, and the northern side was occupied with the chemical engineering. And then when I joined, I was asked to start the physical chemistry laboratory, and by the time I joined, the department was able to acquire some of the equipment either manufactured in India or abroad, but was available with the companies in Chennai or in. So, they were able to obtain quite a few equipment like refractometer, polarimeter, conductivity bridges, potentiometer, and several other things which are required to start experiments. I can only say one thing, that the experiments I set for the third year BTech students in metallurgy was later used for starting the MSc course in physical chemistry. In fact, as some of the students of the pioneer batch was mentioning the other day, the amount of knowledge that was conveyed to the pioneer batch or the first few batches was almost the master's standard. Let me now recapitulate some of the people who were present at the time when I joined. Now, I told you about the professors. In addition, I knew Dr. C. V. Seshadri of chemical engineering, and Mr. Shiva Prasad Rao, Mr. N. V. C. Swamy, Mr. M. C. Gupta, and then Mr. D. S. Subramaniam, Mr. R. Subramaniam, Mr. Siva Subramani, all from the mathematics department. Dr. S. K. Srinivasan, also mathematics department. In the physics, I knew Dr. Rama Shastri and Mr. Bhimashankar Shastri, Mr. Gopalam, Mr. A. Srinivasan, and quite a few others. One Mr. E. M. Gopalakrishnan, whom I had seen in the Institute of Cultivation Sciences Jadavpur in 1960, who was doing his doctorate there. He moved over here, and there was an X-ray diffraction apparatus here, and he completed his work under the guidance of one Dr. B. V. Ramanamurthy, and he submitted his thesis for doctorate. And during that initial period when I joined, a number of German trained Indians started coming back, and one of the persons who returned was Mr. Y. B. G. Verma, and he occupied a room in the Kaveri hostel for a few days. And another person was Mr. Dr. L. V. K. V. Sharma of mathematics. Like that, quite a few people came. I was told at that time that during a visit of the then director Prof. Sengupta to Germany, he had already invited quite a few Indians who were working there to join IIT Madras as lecturers or assistant professors, and then try to help out the initial training for the students. And quite a few who signed the agreement at that time had to come back and then serve IIT Madras at least for 2-3 years like that. And most of them like Mr. Dasgupta, Mr. Majumdar, Mr. Nagbhushanam, and quite a few of them who joined left within 3 years. They were all very good friends of mine. And one of them, Mr. Sur, who was an assistant warden in the Krishna hostel and then in Namra hostel, stayed on for 3-4 years, and then he also left for Germany. And 1 or 2 of my colleagues left for postdoctoral fellowships from other departments, and some went to Germany. They were sent to Germany for training. One of them, I think, was Mr. P. S. Srinivasan of Applied Mechanics, who returned after about 2-3 years and continued till his retirement. About the English department, Professor Krishnamurthy of Pachaiyappa's College was the head, and Mr. V. S. Kumar and one Mr. Vishwanathan were teaching English. And slowly the department started recruiting people of other subjects like Dr. Vairanad Pillai in history with associate lecturer on technical assistant one Ramachandran, and Dr. Anantaraman in economics, and Dr. Ramani was teaching in was doing work in mechanical engineering in the internal combustion engineering, and much later he was sent for training in the Indian Institute of Management, and he started the industrial engineering. I mean, he started working in the industrial engineering section of humanities. Even before he joined, there was Professor R. K. Gupta, Professor Datta, and a few others in the engineering, industrial engineering. In 1961 itself, just after Professor M. Shastri joined, he was collected a lot of information, obtained tenders for a lot of equipment and all that. So, he started finding out the possibilities of importing, but then very little funding was available from the institute. And not only that, in those days, every time you send a tender for a equipment, you had to send it to all the East European countries, including USSR, because they were supplying or selling equipment taking rupees, our Indian currency, whereas you have to pay in dollars or pounds if you try to import equipment from UK or USSR. So, for about 2 years, it was a very difficult task. Now, let me come to something which happened in sometime in 1962. See, in the Department of Metallurgy, 1 or 2 people joined. One came from United States, an assistant professor, one Dr. Pillai, and one T. Ramachandran came from Germany, also an assistant professor, because he was trained and had taken his doctorate in metallurgy in Germany. And then it so happened this Dr. Pillai got a grant from the National Bureau of Standards, work on some thermodynamic data connected with metals, but somehow or other this was not liked by the department, and the director did not permit him to take this project, because started saying that we are being assisted by Germany, and so it will be difficult to accept anything from USA. And there was a lot of problem, and then the concerned faculty member was sent out during the period of probation itself. That led it to some legal problems, but then he could not win the case and he had to leave under very bad circumstances. This was something which all of us youngsters felt, because we didn't know what was our future like. But anyway, in 1962, the institute expanded because the departments buildings of the humanities sciences, the electrical engineering, mechanical engineering, they were all coming up. In fact, when I was an assistant warden in 1962, I used to spend quite a bit of daytime in the building sciences blog, either writing my thesis or doing some work connected with my thesis. It so happened one of the students of Professor M.A.C. Shastri, one Mr. Upreti, who was also writing his thesis, he came from Kharagpur, and so he used to give me company, because he used to also sit and write and give it for correction to his guide, and I was sitting and writing and then sending it to Bangalore for correction. This is how it continued for some time. And in the beginning of 1962 itself, two people were appointed as pool officers from CSR. One was Dr. J.C. Kuriakose, another was Dr. E.G. Mahadevan, who was the younger brother of Dr. E.G. Ramchandran, Professor E.G. Ramchandran. And Dr. E.G. Mahadevan I knew during my student days, because he was 1 year junior to me, but has completed his doctorate in Germany, that too working in a nuclear research center. So he was joining the department in 1962 brought some changes, and anyway that was the time Dr. Rajappa wanted to leave the department to join his professor T.R. Govindachari, who was the principal of Presidency College, and he was going to Bombay to start the SIBA Research and Development Laboratories. He was going as the director, and quite a few of his students were joining, Dr. Rajappa one of them. Just before he left, we started a chemistry colloquium in the Department of Chemistry, and he was the person who inaugurated that function. And during this function, the help rendered by the registrar, Mr. Natarajan, was tremendous, because he sent invitations to all the press and invited the press to grace the occasion, and he made the necessary arrangements also, and he in fact kept a car at my disposal for any purpose. And then once the function was over, the press covered the function, and a few weeks later I arranged a lecture by another person, Dr. M.S. Muthana, who was the director of the Lacris Institute at Ranchi. He later became the deputy director and director of IIT Kanpur. And the chemistry colloquium was one thing, and all of us, the staff members, who were either completed our doctorates or who were almost in the verge of completing our doctorate, started giving seminars on our work. And so most of us gave seminars. Let me tell you that during 1962, we had Dr. Kalidas in physical chemistry, Dr. C.N. Pillai in organic chemistry, and a few others who were technical assistants. They were lifted associate lecturers. There was Dr. S.R.G. Sharma, who was made associate lecturer along with me. He continued as assistant lecturer with me, and I got my doctorate sometime at the end of 1962, and so I was given an increment, so as an associate lecturer. So I, in fact, money wise, I started getting one increment more than my colleague who was already having a doctorate degree, but nothing could be done about it. But it was only in 1962 that technical assistants were appointed, and in every section say inorganic chemistry, physical chemistry and organic chemistry, and some of the people were appointed as junior technical assistants. In 1963, the chemistry department started a master's course, whereas physics department already started in 1962. And then the head of the department met the director, and then he was supported by the heads of departments in physics and mathematics that those who did not have a doctorate should be permitted to work for a doctorate, and those who are not having the master's degree was permitted to do their master's program. Of course, regarding the working for doctorate, it was already going on in mathematics department, and Mr. R. Subramaniam and Mr. Shiva Subramaniam got their degrees in the very first or second convocation. And similarly, I told you that E. M. Gopalakrishna Physics got his doctorate in physics. Regarding the master's program, all the technical assistants were registered. Only condition was they have to complete the course in 3 years instead of the normal 2-year course. Our first batch of MSc students consisted only of 3 students, and then they were asked to do projects with some senior faculty, and most of them could do some experimental work and submit it as a project report at the end of their MSc. Only thing was the selection was made so strict at that time that none of them, the very first batch, could get even a first class. They were all second class students, but then one of them joined, 2 of them joined for doctorate in IIT Madras itself, and they got their doctorates at 3-4 years later. In 1964, the chemistry department started the doctoral program, and 4 students were selected, out of which 2 of them later became staff members, and the persons who became staff members, one Dr. D. V. Ramana and I am trying to forget the names of the people who joined as research scholars. Dr. B. Vishwanathan was one of them, who was recruited as an associate lecturer after 3-4 years. Dr. Udupa was recruited as an associate lecturer within 1 year of joining the doctoral program, because there was a dearth of faculty to teach the inorganic chemistry. Dr. Aramadan, Dr. Rajdaram and Dr. Udupa started teaching inorganic chemistry. And of course, I was available to teach physical chemistry along with the head of the department, Dr. Kuriakose, also Dr. V. Srinivasan. The organic chemistry, again there was no dearth of faculty. Now, it was only in 1965 that I could become lecturer, and then by 1963 itself, the Department of Chemistry moved into the Humanities and Sciences block. We occupied the western wing, the entire 3 floors of the western wing HSB, and then the laboratories, we started equipping the laboratories, and the very first equipment we got was a Stanton thermobalance for doing thermogrametric measurements, and we had obtained an X-ray generator, an Indian made X-ray generator for doing some polar diffraction work, and we also tried to obtain to the Petroleum Research Fund grant, which was in the joint name of Professor M. V. C. Shastri, Dr. Kuriakose and Dr. C. N. Pillai, a gas chromatograph and several sensitive electrical instruments with which we could do some very good measurements. And I could take the help of 1 or 2 colleagues and build a unit for differential thermoanalysis and for making magnetic measurement, that is, we built a magnetic balance with the magnet that was available. All this I could do by about 1967, but at 1966 I was selected for a program, an international workshop this was being held in Germany and Japan. I was selected for the program in Germany. It was normally being held in Karlsruhe, and the very first program that was held in 1965, the first seminar as we call it, one of the faculty members from chemical engineering had gone, Dr. Ramananda Rao. For the second program, nobody was selected. Third program, I was selected. So, I left in May 1967 to Germany. And by that time, by the early 1967, the second Indo-German agreement of a major nature had been signed, and in this program several faculty members from all the departments were sent to Germany on the program called DAAD, Deutsche Akademische Austauschdienst. So, in this from the engineering department, most of them were sent was people of doctorate, with master's degree, so that they could do part of their doctoral work there, and only in the case of one department they had to select technical assistant, but again with master degree. Unfortunately, in this first batch, none from chemistry was selected, because the reason given was that I was already in Germany, so we could skip that year. But in this second year onwards, quite a few from chemistry department also went to Germany, but all of them with their doctorate degrees, so they did some postdoctoral work. Some of them benefited by way of getting some facilities also for the department. Quite a few of them who went to Germany on the DRD later went again on Humboldt fellowship and built very good contact with the German professors there. Among those who built such contacts were my colleagues Professor Kalidas and Professor Ramdas. I am using the word professor because they later became professors. Now, let me come to something about the campus. Now, it was only I told you that the building of the departments were going on in full swing. In 1961 itself, the then director Professor Sengupta had decided that the entire furniture required for the building should be manufactured in the institute campus. So, he had established a very big carpentry unit beyond the present central workshops, and they were churning out furniture for the drawing classes, for classrooms, and for the faculty, technical assistants. Everything was being manufactured there, and he had some sort of a system for what furniture should be had by which type of faculty members and all that. And as far as furniture and facilities the department is concerned, I was made to plan the furniture, the lab furniture for the entire 3 floors in the humanities sciences block, and then I had to do all this work without knowledge of drawing. But then all this used to be checked by the head of the department and with the director himself, and then the furniture were manufactured and set up. So, the quarters were also coming up simultaneously, and in 1962 by about September, most of the quarters were getting ready except for connection of water and electricity. And one day myself and 1 or 2 of my colleagues who were expecting that it would be allotted quarters because our names were already in the list, went in looking at the quarters. We looked at the director's quarters, looked at the professor's quarters as we were walking. The director was going in the car and stopped the car and asked us to get in, and he gave us a lift up to the gate, and he was asking about what we felt about the quarters and all that. In December 1962, we started moving into the quarters, and there were about few professors' quarters, most of them occupied by the German professors. A few assistant professors quarters, which is called as C-type quarters, which were occupied by the German junior staff, workshop staff and others, and a few Indian faculty, and 4 blocks of C1 type quarters, and 7 blocks of D type quarters, and a few blocks of say E type quarters. The post office was situated in one of the D type quarters. The small hospital with a doctor was situated in the E type quarters. He had only 2 rooms, and an attender was helping him, who was earlier in a Kaveri hostel, and I forget the name of the doctor. And before he came, only Dr. P.M. Palani was the doctor who was taking care of the hostels, and during this it has already been mentioned by others during the oral interviews. So, the hospital got its own building only in 1964 or 65, and the number of quarters also started increasing. Regarding the revision of syllabus, what we teach to the student, the very first revision was done in 1962, because we had now faculty in each section of chemistry, and so we started planning a new type of this one, and this was implemented for the 4th batch, that is those who joined in 1962 onwards. And I think when I left for Germany, the administration block was under construction, and then by the end of 1967, the director, Professor Sen Gupta, handed over charge to Professor A. Ramachandran of University of Science, and the administration moved from the BSB to this new building sometime in the middle of 1968. Of course, when I returned in 1968, sometime in July, the director was still sitting in the building sciences block. I met Professor Ramachandran there only. There is something about the peculiarities of some of the faculty who were there at that time, particularly about my own head of the department, Professor M. Shastri. It so happened that in one of the meetings which director had called regarding the allotment of furniture for various faculty, various departments, it was a meeting of the heads of departments. For some reason, the head of the department of chemistry had some dispute with the head director, so he did not want to go, and so he applied for leave, and he did not send any senior staff member. We had assistant professors, we had lecturers, but he asked me to attend the meeting. So, when I went to attend the meeting, told the registrar that I have come, I think head of the department sent you a letter. He said, yes, yes, please take your seat. But then I felt very sort of out of this one when I saw the others were all heads of departments, and 1 or 2 did look at me with a particular way, and 1 or 2 made a comment what happened to the Professor Shastri and all that. But anyway, the meeting went off. I presented whatever data I wanted to the director. He appreciated, and I walked out of this. And then when I was leaving for Germany, another funny thing happened. See, we used to get lists of equipment available in East European countries, which were being sold in rupees. So, there was a list of equipment available in Hungary, one of the East European countries, and then when the list of equipment was circulated to various departments, I was asked by then the head of the department, Mr. Shastri, oh, you find out what our colleagues want and make out a list. And so I went around, collected the list, and then I sent it with a signature to the administration. Surprisingly, when I was away in Germany, it looks like all the equipment which I had sent from the chemistry department, they were all ordered by the government of India, and so it was noticed that the entire non-recurring grant of the Department of Chemistry had been used up for the next financial year. So, when I came back in 1968, the head of the department commented, "How is that you have?" I said, "You are the person who has signed this, so what is it that I can do?" And some things like this happened. We got a liquid nitrogen plant in 1964, and I was asked to sign for the plant when they were all in crates. I said, "How can I just say we have received 27 crates without knowing what is contained inside?" So, it became a dispute, and finally the company came and opened it, a new storekeeper was appointed to take stock of it and all that. And every time something like that was happening. And once in 1965, when the first batch of research students were working, the petrol gas plant caught fire. It was an accident. It was an accident, but then it saved the person who operated the plant that day, research scholar. If he has followed the conventional procedure of operating the plant, he would have been killed that day. But then luckily he adopted the unconventional thing, but the plant got fired because there was a leakage. And at those days we used to have only one phone for the whole administrative or academic block. It used to be in the building sciences block, and we had to rush all the way to the administrative block to make the phone call, and the fire department came and they put out the fire, but in the meanwhile.
Start from previous sentence.
Previous sentence.
Pardon?
Start from
Previous sentence. When the sound came.
the phone sound came, so it was not visible, not audible.
From where?
From the two lines where that fire started.
Fire started.
A fire accident.
Yeah,
Okay. Sometime in 1965, after the first batch of research scholars had admitted, they were working at the organic chemistry laboratory was in the ground floor, and the next to the organic chemistry laboratory was the stores where we had stocked some of the equipment and glassware and all that. Next to that was the petrol gas plant. Now, the research scholar in organic chemistry has operated the petrol gas plant in a unconventional way, and when he went out to the room, locked the lab and went out, he found the whole thing exploded and caught fire, and he rushed all the way to building sciences block where only the phone was available to telephone to the fire services and the police. And by that time the director had heard about the explosion from his house. He had moved there, he had called the head of the department of chemistry, and then he asked the head of the department, "Where is the key of the next room where you have got the stores?" And instead of opening his office and taking out the key from the keyboard, possibly he had not come prepared with the keys, he started blaming his subordinate staff. So, the director got upset, and then he took the decision to break open the door, and the door was broken open, and then the fire was put off. And before they could put out the fire, they found what had caught fire was cables, electrical cables, and so since they didn't know from where the cables had been drawn, they switched off power for the entire campus. This is all miserable. Anyway, I came to know about it after half an hour. I went with the keys of the store because I was holding the keys of the store. I found that watchman had been put in charge. I just told him, "Please take care of it." And next morning I went very early, and we had to shift some of the high pressure hydrocarbon cylinders away from that stores to the laboratory, because if anybody had seen that one, he would have asked, "How could you do this?" Because a place like this, place like this can actually a, a an accident like this could have led to a lot of problems. The next day the newspapers came to make a report and the police turned up, and I had to deal with all these people because the head of the department refused to help me. And with the help of a colleague and some of the laboratory assistant, we shifted the entire stores to rooms on the side western the southern wing. There were some classrooms there, tutorial rooms, and I took permission from the director. Entire thing was shifted, and myself and my colleague gave money to the attendants to do. And this is all the way it was all going on in the department. I do not want to talk about how other department worked because I didn't know. And chemistry had a very good chemistry lecture theatre. Unfortunately, we could not make use of use that lecture theatre for making any demonstrations. So, in fact, later the physics department used to have their demonstration experiments both in physics lecture theatre as well as chemistry lecture theatre. Now, I mentioned about my visit to Germany, and I did not get any training in my special area of research, namely the area of catalysis, but I did work on something to do with powder metallurgy, material science, and I came back and I submitted a report and said I would be very interested if I could do something in this area. Of course, I had already set up an apparatus for doing work in my area because the research scholar had been appointed before I went, and then he had already completed his research work, and so that apparatus was available. So, I could do some work, but then by that time so many things happened, and since the agreement had been signed with a university in Germany, the institute had permitted a building for the applied chemistry, and so this was around 69, and that was the time, due to a difference between me and the head of the department, both of us fell ill, and he had to admitted to hospital, and he was there almost for 3 months. And by the time he came back, the equipment from Germany, which was supposed to be supplied to chemistry, already was being the quotations were coming, and I asked to help him in doing this. And this is the story as far as the chemistry department is concerned. And by 1969, most of the workshops were completed in 1962, but the workshop type laboratory started later, and then when Professor Ramchandran came here, he started 3 independent things for say for foundry. He started the metal casting. Of course, it was in the foundry section of the metallurgy department, and then he started another section of metal joining, that means welding. Of course, there was already a workshop for welding, and then he started another for metal forming. So, he introduced the MS program in metal casting, metal forming and metal joining. And in addition, he started quite a few things: refrigeration, air conditioning, heat and mass transfer laboratories. Now, the workshop type laboratories I told you were not being filled up because it was all coming under the second individual agreement, and only 1 or 2 labs were filled up. So, these halls were being used for conducting examinations sometimes, and when the first chairman of board of governors was given, Professor L. Madaliar was given a send off. So, the function was arranged in one of those workshop type laboratories, and when Mr. H. V. Iyengar took over as the chairman of the board of governors, it was Mr. H. V. Iyengar who laid the foundation stone at the applied chemistry block. Today, the applied name has been removed. It is called as the Department of Chemistry. So, it is a chemistry block. Of course, there are many things which happened between 1968 and 1971. Considering my own question of my own future, somewhere in 1971, several vacancies were advertised for assistant professors in various departments, but it so happened the heads of department was given the freedom to select the field or areas in which they could advertise, and my area of research was not advertised, although it was the area of my head of department also. But then the director at that time had used to call all those who had the minimum qualification for interview. In fact, even in 1969, I had been called for the post of professors, and I was again interviewed in 1971 for the post of assistant professors. But then due to some technical reason, because my area of interest was not advertised, I was not promoted, but it matters very little. But then the director felt bad, many people felt bad, and the director at that time when I met him, he asked me to move over to the defense metallurgical laboratory, and not only that, he was prepared to make me a convener of a committee with 3 professors. One of them was a professor in mechanical engineering, Professor V.C. Venkatesh, and Professor Gopichand of chemical engineering, and Professor E.J. Ramachandran of metallurgy. He said, you are going to coordinate, but you will have to do some work which will be of interest to in materials science and technology. Of course, I must say at this time that he went to the metallurgy department and told them, you have to start working on materials, particularly ceramics, and then he mentioned my name there. And similarly, he went to mechanical engineering and told them, we have to work on composites, and so there is a person who has some experience in that, make use of him. Like that, he made gave me some importance in the institute. Unfortunately, it was not supported by all the faculty in the respective departments, and so although I started some work in powder metallurgy, I gave a course in powder metallurgy for students in Madras University and Indian Engineering College, and quite a few students expressed their desire to their MTech in powder metallurgy in IIT Madras. I could only take a student for the PhD program, but unfortunately he did very good work. We could design equipment, but we could do very good samples we could make, and this was publicized in industries also. But then the particular student did not stay to complete his PhD degree. So, this introduced me to the materials science and technology area. I think I will stop at this stage, and I will continue the talk about the campus facilities which existed at that time and how it developed from time to time in a future talk. Thank you.